Good. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank you for joining us today for the first of our fall 2021 series. My name is Patricia Lopez. I'm assistant professor in the Kremen School of Education here at Fresno State, and I'm also director of Enseñamos en el Valle Central, which has the honor of hosting this series. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we gather here at Fresno State campus on the traditional lands of the Yokuts and Manos people, past and present. And we honor with gratitude the land itself and the people who have stewarded it throughout the generations. Acknowledging the land is an important indigenous practice that we are honoring here today and is an integral part of consciousness raising and explicit expressions of anti-racism, anti-racist epistemologies, and generational healing. This practice calls us to commit to continuing to learn how to be better stewards of the land we inhabit as well, including the recognition that Native peoples and communities are still present and the struggle for sovereignty continues. To all our future and current educators that are joining us today, welcome. I want to stress the importance of land recognition as a part of our classroom practices and expressions of gratitude and appreciation to those whose territory we reside on, in a way of honoring the indigenous peoples who have been living and working on the land from time immemorial. Land acknowledgements do not exist in a past tense or in historical context. Colonialism is a current ongoing process, and this is really an important takeaway that today's Plática will also underscore: the taking of land, the movement of people, and the need to reflect and understand ourselves within that history. So I invite all of you who are listening via Zoom and or Facebook, please feel free. You can use the chat box, the comment box to acknowledge the Native peoples whose lands you're currently occupying. Please also acknowledge and pay honor to your own indigenous roots and ancestors. Call them in to the space, ask them to guide us and through today's Plática. For those of you who have been with us in previous events, welcome back. Thank you for being here. If this is your first time participating in an event sponsored by Enseñamos en el Valle Central, we welcome you. Bienvenidas. I want to briefly share that we are part of a federal funded Hispanic Serving Institution HSI initiative that's focused on cultivating future educators with a commitment to equity, justice, liberation, and anti-racism. A very integral part of our approach to cultivating future educators, or what some refer to as growing our own, is an explicit commitment to anti-deficit, anti-racist, and anti-oppressive ways of knowing and being, holding space for educators and community, just like today, that value service to community, political awareness, and civic engagement for the public good. This vision and the principles that we uphold are grounded and informed by a long history of community struggles for self-determination, liberation, and access to the teaching profession, and an education system that reflects the racialized experiences and contributions of those it serves. A system that does away with racial, cultural, economic, and linguistic hierarchies by first owning the fact that they exist. So today's Plática is part of a larger Community Taller and Plática series that is focused on advancing anti-racist dialogues through the lenses of art, culture, identity, and community healing. Our panelists today are going to historicize and contextualize the often celebrated day of 16 de Septiembre, and also share how K-12 educators are bringing awareness to issues of race, class, colonization that are embedded in this history, in this day that we are acknowledging as they work with youth. So feel free, again, use the chat to engage one another. Give shout outs to our panelists who are here today, and use the Q&A box to ask questions. We will save about 30 minutes at the end for dialogue with panelists and open it up, and perhaps more if we can get through the content. So with that, I want to jump in and I want to introduce our amazing panelists. Our first panelist I want to acknowledge is Carla Bretado. She's a teacher at Washington Academic Middle School in Sanger Unified. She's a daughter of Mexican immigrants. She holds a bachelor's degree in history and a social science credential and a master's in education, all from Fresno State. Go Bulldogs. She's also currently exploring EDD doctoral programs. So if anyone out there is looking for some good candidates, pay attention to this young educator. Carla teaches 7th grade world history, and she runs the Gender and Sexuality Alliance on campus. She's also part of various committees, including those focused on UDL, GVI, and technology integration. When she's not in the classroom, Carla is a runner, a reader, and an auntie, a tia to a bunch of beautiful brown babies. Welcome, Carla. Next, we have Fernando Santillan. He is a teacher of Chicanic Studies at Edison High School in Fresno Unified. Fernando is also a Fresno State alumni, Go Bulldogs. He's a double major in history and Chicano Latino studies. He received his teaching credential in social science with the bilingual certification from Sac State. He's currently in his 5th year of teaching at Edison High School in Southwest Fresno. During his time at Edison, he's established and wrote the curriculum for Chicanic Studies. Fernando also teaches race and social justice, which is an alternative to the U.S. high school graduation requirement, and has also established a Metro chapter at his campus. Welcome, Fernando. Next, we have Marisa Rodriguez. She's a social science teacher at Roosevelt High School, also in Fresno Unified. Marisa was born and raised in Visalia, California. Let's go. She graduated from Redwood High School and also a Fresno State alum. She got her BA in history from Fresno State before receiving her teaching credential from Fresno Pacific. She was previously working at Lindsay High and then moved to Fresno Unified, where she currently is at Roosevelt, teaches modern world history along with ethnic studies. In addition to teaching, Marisa is an executive board member for Fresno Teachers Association. She is also a percussionist in a local band, Mezcal. Marisa is an advocate for classroom teachers, encouraging teacher agency, developing curriculum and facilitating instruction. And she promotes the use of social-emotional learning for all students and really strives to establish safe learning communities where all students are valued and supported. It's beautiful, Marisa. Next, we have Matt Espinosa Watson, JD. He's a professor of Chicanics Latinx Studies at Fresno City College. Matt was born and raised in Fresno, graduated from Fresno State with dual degrees in philosophy and Chicano Latino studies. Before attending law school at UC Berkeley, he started teaching at college level in 2006 at both Fresno State and Fresno City College, where he taught Intro to Chicano Latino Studies. And then he realized he wanted to teach full-time if possible. And that became possible in 2010 when Matt also began graduate work at San Jose State in Mexican American Studies Department, now the Chicano Studies program. Quickly thereafter took on a full-time position at Fresno City, mentored by Profe Arturo Amaro. And Matt is currently the department chair of the Cultural and Women's Studies Department at FCC, where Chicano Latino Studies and other ethnic studies programs are housed. Matt and his wife have 3 beautiful small children that have kept them on their toes throughout the pandemic. And he is thrilled to be part of this conversations with teachers across the institution. So let's bring that energy of young children, Matt. I'm going to hand it over to you, and yeah, let's get going. Thank you.
So again, great to be here, and let's see, let me unmute. All right. So I started off with a title that comes from a legendary Chicano poem from the 1960s, the poem I Am Joaquin by Jorge Gonzalez. Right, and that's the quote about Mexican independence. The crown was gone, but all its parasites remained. So again, my name is Matt Espinosa Watson. I teach Latino Studies at FCC. I want to share a critical race perspective on Mexican independence. So in the short time I want to try to summarize here, I want to focus on the idea of some context, right? And I think that's a lot of what we're trying to do here today. And so to understand independence is to understand that there's a conquest and colonization of Mexico that happens, right, in the 1500s, that Spain comes and takes over, that is at once a process that happens in the 1500s, but an ongoing thing, right, throughout this colonial period. What I'm sharing here is a painting by Jose Clemente Orozco, a major Mexican muralist of the early 20th century. And Orozco and Rivera, Siqueiros, and others, what they were really trying to do and doing in the 20s and 30s was painting Mexico's history all over the buildings of Mexico City, Guadalajara, and other big cities of Mexico. And attempting to make this history public, attempting to make Mexico's history something that everybody could access and interact with, right? And so I want to, I think take that with that spirit, sharing their images today to think about Spanish conquest, right? There's not obviously time here to go into details of that, but Orozco's painting gives us an idea, right? Rivera, similarly, I have two paintings that I shared here from Diego Rivera. Again, to kind of summarize, what does it mean that for 300 years, Mexico is a colony of Spain, right? Well, it means the Spanish exploitation of the land and the people within that land, right? It means the extraction of wealth on a tremendous scale, right? That is coming not just from land and bodies, but, well, not just land and bodies that are native to Mexico, but also the importation of African people, right? As part of the transatlantic slave trade as well. And so Rivera here is giving us a snapshot of the history of Morelos and the caña, right, the sugarcane fields. And so we have a very kind of clear, without, again, picking up a book, we have an understanding of who's the Spaniard and who are the native people of Mexico and what are their roles here, right? And again, the last one I share is one we've shared along with, I think, the flyer for this event, which is The Exploiters, another painting by Diego Rivera. And here we're looking at a mining scene, right? And again, just kind of who's on horseback with the weapons, who are the ones who are the bodies who are doing the work, right? So Rivera helps us to imagine what 300 years of the Spanish in charge in Mexico, or at least, I don't know, in charge, the Spanish the colonial project in Mexico looks like, right? So for me, one of the most important things I think to understand about the fight for independence in Mexico is the fight against a particular system. And it's that system that I've just shown us in terms of exploitation and of the land and the people, but it's also this very particular system called the casta system, right? And this is essentially this idea that within New Spain, the colonial name for Mexico, there is this hierarchy created of the races and the mixtures of the races, right? And so we're looking here at one of those what are traditionally called casta paintings, right? That showcase these the different possibilities, right, of European, indigenous, and African people coming together and having children, right, in Mexico and in the Americas. The piece, I guess, that is most well known, the term I think that gets used and thrown around the most often is mestizo or mestiza. And that was like, at least at this point and juncture in time, it's a colonial term applied to a very particular mixture, right? It's half Spaniard, half indigenous. And so that's, we're looking at that in this image here, right? Getting a sense that within these images, we can get a tremendous amount of insight, not just into colonial Mexico and what people are kind of resisting as they fight for independence, but we can get an insight also into our modern systems of racism that we live with today. And that's really what I think a lot of scholars are doing in the 21st century with the casta paintings and within Chicano studies in particular. I mentioned sometimes the work of Robert Con Davis Undiano, who writes about the idea that basically our modern racism is rooted here in the casta system, and that we can, in examining it, we can get an insight into that, right? He says that some will be surprised to discover that the Americas version of community and culture was taking shape as early as the 16th and 17th centuries, a perspective that's clearly not part of US public awareness. This period's casta system of racial categories, combining indigenous and European standards of physical appearance and different ideas of the body, along with a strict colonial hierarchy, is still shaping identities and limiting social participation everywhere in the Americas. And so one of the things that we see along with the casta paintings is that it's not just about describing race, it's also about looking at like social class and categorization, and as we go down the line that is, the Spanish create, where the Spaniard is on top and that the people who are native and African are further down on this list, we also see a sense of like social status and the jobs people are kind of, painted as working in as well. And so all of these things are coming to life, I think, through the casta paintings. And so I would say that I guess that scholars in Chicano studies now are talking about everybody's need, like our need, not just if you're interested in Mexico and Mexican history and Latin American or Latino issues, but to the extent we are, in the US today, and you want to have some insight into racism today, that we have to take a look back at this particular system, right? And so there's a lot that's going on in Mexico that leads to independence, right? There's a lot of resistance against these things that I've shared here. There's a lot of other ideas floating around in the society, but what I want to kind of transition us toward here is taking some cues from the wars for independence and getting a sense of, here I have I guess an image that is another Diego Rivera mural, right, from the National Palace in Mexico. And this one is just really, I insert here to showcase those, like, the key figures who often get highlighted, who we're not gonna, I don't think, spend much time with today. There's so many fascinating stories, I think, within the wars for Mexican independence and some of these figures, but that's not what we're here to really address today, right? But Father Hidalgo and Morelos and Vicente Guerrero, and then the guy who ends up Emperor of Mexico as well, right? But we're gonna, that's not what we're kind of here to address. I do want to address the idea, that, the picture's jumping around a little bit there. Address the idea, though, that when Mexico did achieve independence, so it was after 11 years of fighting and lots of death and war, right? Fighting for this independence. It was under the rule of Agustin de Iturbide, who is this guy actually that looks like a king over here, right? And he is the first emperor of Mexico. And that empire that exists, the Mexican empire that exists for a couple of years, actually includes these newly independent Central American nations also, right? And so Central American independence that is recognized yesterday, right, the 15 de Septiembre, and these, Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, Nicaragua, right, Costa Rica, their independence and their stories are linked to the story of Mexico and Mexican independence in a way that I think is, we need to explore more. So not have time to talk about that more right now. But one of the things I always emphasize in my classroom settings when talking about the topic like this in a Mexican American history class or an intro class, for instance, is this particular individual and his importance within the wars and the movement for independence, but really his importance kind of in the story afterward also. And that's Vicente Guerrero. He is the guy on horseback here, right? And just a little synopsis is he helps fight for independence. He is part of creating the first Mexican Constitution in 1824, which is after the emperor, right? It's so that it becomes a federal republic, it becomes a democracy, and he's part of that process. And it's when he became president of Mexico, though, in 1829, he was the second president of Mexico, right? And Vicente Guerrero is of mixed African, Native, and European descent, right? And that is very significant in the history. It's something that's often left out and has been left out kind of generationally from a lot of people's knowledge, I think, of who Vicente Guerrero is. People within Mexico know the name and him as a hero, but not necessarily him as somebody of African descent. But in any case, Guerrero's descent is relevant here also, I think, as when he becomes president in 1829, he outlaws slavery in all Mexican territories. And those Mexican territories at the time include this territory that we call Texas, right? And so there's this like very direct link between Mexican independence and one of the major heroes for Mexican independence, who has a state named after him in Mexico, right, Guerrero, and him outlawing slavery in all Mexican territories is a very direct lead into the Alamo, and it's there's a lot of great revisionist history being done right now with Forget the Alamo and some recent books that have come out challenging the traditional story. But so slavery and the issues of race, right, are prominent in Mexican independence and the fight against Spain, right? And and also tie so clearly into our shared histories in terms of the United States and Mexico, and leading us into a Mexican-American War and the conquest of the West. So I want to focus for a second as I try to wrap on looking at a couple of the ideas that motivated independence, whether or not those ideas were ever realized, right? Whether or not those ideas ever became real. The ideas that motivated that fight was for many people to abolish this casta system and the idea of these racial hierarchies, to abolish slavery of all kinds. A very driving idea for many of the indigenous people who fought alongside Hidalgo, Morelos, Guerrero, and others was that the land would be put back into the hands of the legitimate owners of the land, and that would be them, the pueblos themselves, right? And so to me, that's very linked to the third thing I list there, the idea of autonomy or self-determination, right? So I think the first thing kind of happened in the aftermath of Mexican independence, the second two less so maybe, right? And so that's part of what we kind of want to think about. I want to share a couple of quotes as I end, and one is from a book here, Francisco López Bárcenas, called Las Rebeliones Indígenas en la Mixteca. And the reason I guess I wanted to bring this in, for one, is to give another perspective that isn't the one we usually see, maybe on Mexican independence. And also because, I mean, in particular, because of like having been a teacher here in the Central Valley and in Fresno for the last 15 years at Fresno City and here at Fresno State. I've had so many students from Oaxaca who've educated me so much on so many different things, right? But who are Mixteco and Zapoteco and Triqui. And so that's been part of expanding my consciousness through the students that I've had. In any case, so if we look at La Mixteca, I'll just say, like, we get a whole different picture. What did independence mean for the indigenous people of this part of Mexico? And that's one story, and that's a different story than we're going to get if we look at the Purépecha in Michoacán, right? And it's a different story than we're going to get. And what he emphasizes in his book is really the idea that, like, the elites take advantage of the movement and make it about them taking power, and that's what happens over and over again in a lot of movements, right? And so he shares, again, I'm just kind of, I guess, running through these quotes. I want to actually just kind of get to this end piece so that I can open up and hear from fellow teachers here, right? The fight for independence in the end, for me, really boils down to some basic things, and some basic things we don't learn about often, I would say, in school, or that I didn't grow up learning about, that I started learning about maybe in college, right? And so Eduardo Galeano, a writer from Uruguay, has a book called Ser como ellos, where he highlights the idea that, like, very little space is ever given to the American past, that is the indigenous rebellions and the rebellions of African slaves that were continuous ever from 1493 onward, and that we don't learn about those. And when we don't learn about those, we're like we don't understand history, for one, right? But we also don't understand how we fit into all of these pieces. I want to end here with a very simple statement that comes from this book, basically, Nuestra Armas, Nuestra Palabra, the writings of Subcomandante Marcos. And that is, to me, just kind of to get to the heart of the matter, and which is what is the fight for Mexican independence about, and what is the fight for Central American independence about, and what are these fights about? Whether or not they ever realized what they were fighting for, right? What they were about was standing up for dignity. What they were about was something simple, right? And on some level, at least, right? That is, and I love this quote, right? Because it's simple yet so powerful. And I guess I'll translate it into English. I have it up here in Spanish, right? But it says, dignity cannot be studied, right? You live it or it dies, right? You live it or it dies. You feel it or it hurts in the heart, and it teaches us to walk. And so at the end of the day, to me, like, that's what Mexican independence, those are the lessons I try to learn, and to look back and to, again, connect to us today also, like those struggles that are going on in all around us. So I thank you for your time. I'm going to stop there and look forward to more conversation.
Thank you, Matt. Professor Espinosa Watson. All right. We're going to hand it to you now, Fernando.
All right, thank you. So I teach in a little different context. I teach Chicano studies at the high school level. And so as we've been developing like our ethnic studies in the program here in Fresno Unified. Part of what we do is not just the history, but we also analyze systems and specifically looking at identity, right? And so as I was looking at how to blend all these things together, I kind of experimented, I messed up a few times, right? But this is what I came up with, and this is the best iteration of that I have right now. Next slide, please. So after exploring systems and exploring identity, then when we get into history, we start off with this question, right? What is settler colonialism? We have to ground students' understanding in this as we call it a playbook, And so, next slide, please. What we do, we read a couple articles, and I just pulled out some of the quotes here that really kind of stand out and resonated with the students regarding colonialism, right? So colonialism is a system that occupies and usurps labor, land, resources from one group of people for the benefit of another. Okay. Another one, instead of colonialism, land, not labor, is key. Another one here, indigenous people are erased through outright genocide, assimilation, interbreeding, including rape. In this process, racialized categories become important for perpetuating the system. And then lastly, in settler colonialism, invasion is a structure, not an event. This means that settler colonialism is not just a vicious thing of the past, such as the gold rush, but exists as long as settlers are living on appropriated land and does exist today. So these are kind of like 4 quotes that I felt really set up the analysis of looking at Mexican history in a truncated way that we do it in this class, because we don't have a whole lot of time, right? So what we do, after we learn this concept of settler colonialism and its functions and the way it works, we start looking at early colonial Mexico. And when we start looking at early colonial Mexico, we explore a whole bunch of different things. Some of the things that Matt covered here, right? Some of those Casta things, some of the racial things going on, assimilation, language, a little bit of everything, right? And so what you're looking up on the board here is an infographic that students did where they were supposed to pull out like the 8 most important things that they thought was a result of the impact of colonialism. Previous slide, actually. And so that's what you see here. And this is really like a summary of the things we do before we get to the Mexican Revolution, right? I'm Mexican independence, I'm sorry. And so they had these things flowing around as we get to the Mexican independence. Next slide, please. And so what that does, it really sets up the framing of these next 3 things, right? Because we do Mexican independence, we do Mexican Revolution, and then we do the Zapatista movement. And we really frame it as this resistance to settler colonialism. Next slide, please. And specifically, so specifically, we look at the Mexican independence as resistance, and we look at some of those demands, right? Land, racial equality, autonomy, right? And that's something that we see recurring when we look at the Mexican Revolution and later on the Zapatistas. Next slide, please. And so this is just some of the other stuff here we explore. We go a little bit into Mexican Revolution. We look at some of those demands. We look at the easy out land and some of their demands. And then we start exploring, like in one ways, are they resisting some of the impacts of colonization in those demands that they have? And like I said, it's a recurring theme: land, racial equality, autonomy throughout all 3 of these. And so students really start seeing settler colonialism as what we read, right? As something that's continuous and that's happening today. Once we've established that, next slide, please. Then we start with a few questions where we revisit identity. So initially we had already studied identity. I let them explore, what's a Chicano, what's a Latino, what's Hispanic, etc. Now that we've covered all this, though, then we have an opportunity to go back, right? How does knowing your history change your identity? That's something that we discussed. How does understanding colonialism impact our understanding of these terms that we always use, right? Latinx, Chicanx, Hispanic, and like, where do you sit within this? And then a deep one that we talk about when we talk about, colonialism as something that's still going on today. How do we that are living with the remnants of settler colonialism, how do we decolonize, right? They have a lot of these pieces already, and they pull from Mexican independence, Mexican Revolution, and from the Zapatista movement as a way to kind of support some of their answers there. But it's always super interesting to hear kids say, like, you know what, I'm indigenous. I'm not Latinx, I'm not Hispanic. I use that as a unifying term, but I identify as an indigenous person. I decolonize. I'm gonna go home and eat some maíz. I'm gonna eat some tortillas with some frijoles, with some chile, and that's gonna be straight up Mesoamerican food, right? And so this framing is what allows me to kind of explore all these issues and some of the issues that Matt had mentioned. And I think that's all I have for y'all.
All right. Yeah. Fernando?
Well, thank you. That was a perfect segue into my presentation. So I'm teaching ethnic studies as an elective at Roosevelt High School. And so we're going to pull up the PowerPoint so that I can kind of speak to this unit that we are on. Similarly, as he was discussing the topics that his class has been discussing, we focus around this unit 1 on defining what is race, as a social construct, and then what is ethnicity, and what are some ethnonyms, right? And we've been having some discussions, we've been watching some videos, we've been reading some articles, and some of this gets deep, and it's it's kind of tough to talk about, especially like I remember the WebQuest activity where we were talking about racism in the United States and its history. One of my students, this is sad. I mean, it just came out, and so these are somewhat controversial and difficult topics to explore, but the kids are like sponges. They want it, it's healing. And so if we have the PowerPoint up, you can see after discussing some of these videos and articles, I led the students through a reading of portions of Corky Gonzalez's I Am Joaquin. And so we talked about unpacking some of these terminology like Mexicano and Chicano and all that. Talked about, how we are going to reclaim some of these names and what do you, want to label yourself as and all that. And so we kind of ended with this culminating project that is called a flower, right? Identity flower. And then also I had them kind of like a spin-off of Corky's I Am Joaquin poem. They also wrote their own poems. Okay. Next slide, please. Actually, I meant to talk about SEL. Yeah, because I know we're talking to potential educators for Fresno Unified and other surrounding schools. And so SEL is this term for social emotional learning. And so I was saying earlier, some of these topics, the kids take it to heart, and you can kind of get to a very dark place, right? And so we want to make sure that we're also weaving in opportunities for the kids to heal, right? And to empower them. And so I'm a strong advocate, promoter of SEL, social emotional learning in the classroom. This idea of not everything we do as teachers and students is reading and writing. Sometimes we can just pause, we can have discussions, and we can make art, and we express ourselves to try to get to that place of, like I said, of healing. Okay, so go ahead, next slide. You can see some of the categories that my students had. I think your students were doing these too as well. Identity flowers, and so some of the different categories of race, sport, nationality, immigration status, ethnicity, et cetera, et cetera. And it was good to see some of the students of the different age groups, because as an elective, I can have 9th graders all the way to 12th graders take this class. And so some of them are a little bit more shy about what they want to kind of like portray, and put down. But I'm like we talked about in our PLC as we were planning, to do activities like this. If you are somebody that's listening right now and you want to be an educator, we talked about laying down foundations and really engaging in social emotional activities where we can empower the kids to kind of come out of their shell. And so you kind of have to do a lot of prep work. Basically what I'm saying is this is after like 2 weeks of prep work. And hopefully the kids can feel comfortable to really just kind of just say whatever it is that you're feeling, like he was saying, I'm indigenous, So we'll go ahead and go to the next slide. So I have various copies of some of the students' final work, and they all did a great job, and they're all super proud, and they knew I was going to be presenting this. So they were like, oh, I want to make sure it looks good. I will be highlighting two of the poems. And so I'll start with Maria. Maria is a ninth grader. And let's see here. Some of the stuff she put on, let me go to my other picture. Oh yeah, some of the stuff she put on her identity flower. She's a Roosevelt High student. She has two sisters. She's an older sister, or she has an older sister, a younger sister. Yeah, she's a very determined, studious student. And so I would like to read for you what she wrote in her I Am poem. I am quiet. I wonder why there's so much injustice in the world. I hear the sounds of people's cries and laughters. I see the achievements and struggles of people. I want to understand the unjust. I am quiet. I pretend there is peace. I feel the prying eyes of the ones waiting for me to fail. I need to understand there is a point to help, to heal. I worry they will believe the lies of the serpent with the sugar veil. I cry for the ones who lost their lives trying to make a change. I am quiet. I understand the unjust. I believe something can change. I dream of a future brighter than reality. I try to help the ones affected by the serpent. I hope there will be change. I am quiet. Right? So that's Maria. And then so here's now Evelyn. Evelyn is an 11th grader, junior. Some of the things she put on her identity flower here. She's into volleyball. She's a junior. She's born in the US. She's a Christian. She loves horseback riding. And so now I'm going to read for you her I Am poem. I am brown. I wonder if we're ever going to stop being racist. I hear people laughing and getting along with everybody. I see several different skin-colored humans together. I want racism to stop. I am brown. I pretend like everything's okay. I feel like so much more needs to be done. I need my family. I worry about them. I cry when people get judged for no reason. I am brown. I understand we want change the way people think. I believe God will guide us. I dream every day we'll get along. I try to have hope for our nation. I hope for equality for everybody. I am brown. So those were, like I said, really powerful work from two of my students. And so again, I speak to you. I'm going to talk to you through my lens as an advocate for the Fresno Teachers Association and Teachers Union. For those of you on the call that are thinking about going into education, or you are teachers and you are educators, to kind of go along with the theme of, what is Mexican independence all about? It's this resistance, right? And you have to live it. And so we have to take and protect this class called ethnic studies that we get to teach now. And we have to make sure that we are promoting it for our students to be taking. I honestly feel like I should have more ethnic studies classes. Why do I only get one? Why do I only have 20 students? The more that we can have conversations, if you have, children or cousins or brothers or sisters that are taking these courses, or they're not taking these courses, why not? Right now it's an elective, and we kind of have free reign on what we get to teach. Who knows what happens when it becomes a required course? I want it to become a required course, but we got to make sure that we as professionals, as educators, are really making sure that it's reflective of the lessons that we want to be taught. And we have to make sure that we are championing the work and we are promoting it and showing it and sharing these stories. So if you are an educator that is in this work, talk about it, put it on the socials, participate in things like this, because we want to protect this class. We don't want to see it turn into something where, it's not having the impact that it can have. And I will leave you with this, there are people that always want to try to talk about the possible, criticisms of what this class can do. We have to be just as vocal in combating those myths. And there was one thing I was going to say about, now I'm forgetting, but maybe it'll come up in the Q&A. No, I guess I'll leave it on that.
All right, do I need to join audio, or is the mic on, or are we just using yours? I think your mic's. Okay. Nope, I guess I don't have permission to share. Is muted. Yeah. Yeah, because we were using Matt's earlier.
Okay, I'll just make sure mine's.
I think it's on now. But now it might be echoing.
Which
Okay.
one's on? Yours is on.
Okay. Okay, cool. All right, awesome. So I can just re-say what I said. I'm focusing more on like K through I guess K through 8 education. So it's mostly talking about the foundations of teaching these big topics like the essays with students. So you can go ahead and go to the next slide. So the first thing I want to start off by saying is, middle school social studies is the very first opportunity that kids have to have like a designated history class. Going from K through 6, they're in one classroom with the same teacher all the time. And those teachers are not necessarily prepared to teach, specialized social science instruction. So a lot of times social science gets pushed to the back burner. And so middle school history is super, super critical in that sense. In addition, I know 6th grade sometimes gets grouped into the middle schools. Our middle school used to have 6th grade, not anymore, but 6th and 7th grade social studies is the very first opportunity that kids have to look at history outside of North America. So it kind of widens their perspective, their worldview. So it is very critical for middle school social studies teachers to, teach history the right way. Go ahead and go to the next slide, please. In 7th grade social studies, I don't get to teach about, the essays or any more modern topics because my history is like medieval history. So it's very limited. However, we do talk about the Mesoamerican people, the Aztecs, the Maya, and I added the Andean society, the Inca, just because the standards groups them together, even though they're very different. And the one thing I want to say about that is that it's very important for teachers who teach 7th grade history to teach about these societies separate from colonization. So talking about them, not just in the context of the conquistadores, right? Talking about them as separate societies who existed for a very long time, who were stewards of the land, who had their own advancements. You could talk about agriculture, astronomy, architecture. There's so much to talk about prior to, Cortez and his men, right? So educators have to acknowledge and honor these indigenous knowledges and advancements pre-contact. Because, and I think you guys all touched on it, we have to include perspectives of resistance, right? A lot of the textbooks, and we have 4 different textbooks at our school, every single one of them makes it seem like the indigenous people were just passive. And it doesn't, none of them include perspectives of resistance. So that kind of falls to us, you know, to look for those, because they're there. They're there, and we just have to be sure to acknowledge them. And I'm not sure if these slides will be linked, but the resistance where it's underlined, that's actually a link. And it links to a Google Arts and Culture kind of an expedition that has different primary source documents showing indigenous resistance, specifically for the Aztecs. And then, you know, teachers should include art and artifacts just in general, especially oral histories, you know, that gets always pushed to the back burner too, but when we teach about these. And then moving on to high school social studies, you know, when the kids get to high school, they should be able to have deeper analysis, deeper, I don't know, more depth into what they're learning. So to get there though, and you can go to the next slide, what does this mean that the kids have to have this deeper knowledge and have the opportunity for deeper analysis? It means that K-6 teachers need to do their job. And historical context is entirely necessary for students to be able to participate in these classes, right? Whether it's higher education or in high school, whether it's an elective or an actual, you know, history course for A through G. In order for kids to really understand these concepts, they need to have prior experience. I was preparing for this presentation. I was looking through the standards for K-6, and I didn't know this, but there are so many huge concepts that kids should already know by the time they're in 3rd grade. So if you see the K, the 1, the 2, the 3, by the time kids are in kindergarten, they should already know about geography and citizenship. By the time they're in 3rd grade, they should know about colonization. But these guys get to me and they have no idea. They don't know. So what that tells me is that, you know, K-6 educators, they need to be intentional about their social studies instruction. And they're not the only ones to blame. We also need to call in, not call out, teacher preparation programs. You know, a lot of these teachers go through these teacher preparation programs without having a clue of how to teach social science. And so preparing them a little bit better to feel more confident to teach that is key. In addition to teacher preparation programs, we also need to talk to our districts and our boards because they're prioritizing certain subjects. Let's be honest, they just want us to teach ELA and math. And we all have to support ELA and math. And that's great and it's important, it is. But in the end, there's, you know, we're missing out. Our kids are missing out on a lot of stuff because they're not getting social studies instruction. You can go to the next slide. So I just broke down a little bit about K-6 social studies. Pretty much kindergarten through 5th grade is all American history. In 4th grade is when the kids take a deep dive into California, and that's when they get the opportunity to learn about the SECs in the context of the Mexican-American War and about Alta California and how it's about land. So you can go ahead and go to the next slide. So why am I complaining about this? Why does it matter so much? We want to be anti-racist, right? We want our kids to practice this and we want them to be aware of what's happening in the world. So without giving them this context, they're not going to become informed citizens of the world. Over the last couple of years, you know, I've seen a lot of posts online, people saying, oh, I never got taught this in school. Nobody taught me this in school. I think you said that earlier too. You know, the whitewashing of the curriculum just hinders our progress as a society. So we need to make sure that we're teaching this. In addition, studying history is connected to identity work. I cannot stress that enough, right? When we learn history, we get empowered, we're liberated, we go back to our roots, we take back our language. History allows us to explore our identities by ourselves, with each other, with an adult that can be there to support. And a big part for me personally is that second bullet point right there, going against that mindset of ni de aquí, ni de allá. Growing up, I always felt that way, and learning my history really rooted me in figuring out who I was. And I think a lot of our kids are dealing with that. they don't know who they are and where they belong. They're too brown for some spaces and they're too Americanized for others. So really going into history and social studies classes and doing that identity work is going to help them. And just lastly, in the context of Mexican independence, learning history in general, it could help, combat biases, misconceptions, cultural appropriation. A lot of kids, when they saw my dress today, they said, oh, I didn't know it was Cinco de Mayo. And I said, guys, let's have a talk, right? All right, you can go to the next slide. So just, I'm almost done. Some tips and resources for K through 6 educators. The very first thing is expand your own education, right? We want to instill this in our kids. Be lifelong learners. You're going to be lifelong learners. You can't say that to them if you're not modeling it. And education doesn't have to be in an institution, right? That's big colonizer energy. It could be more of a community event. It could be more casual, right? You can listen to podcasts, read books, watch YouTube videos, right? Build community, talk to other educators, get connected. That also helps. Another big thing that teachers can do is teach history when you teach ELA. A lot of people think history is just facts, facts, facts. It's not. It's literally reading and writing. That's how you do history. So integrating it into ELA instruction is a good way for K-6 educators. In addition, look at your curriculum. I got sent some 4th grade curriculum the other day because I was planning on building some lessons. And I'm looking through this and I'm like, who's missing from this? Who's missing? That's what you got to do too. This next one, teach history accurately and don't be performative, right? A lot of K-6 educators, they'll teach Black history during Black History Month. But if you're teaching K through 5, that's all American history. That's Black history. There is no American history without Black history. So don't just do it for holidays, right? The whole heroes and holidays approach. Do it accurately, right? Honor the people that you're talking about. And then I just linked a bunch of different resources. The ones with asterisks are more for 6th grade, but there's a lot of different resources there for elementary school teachers. Facing History in Ourselves, that's a website. It has built out lesson plans that talk about anti-racism, prejudice, anti-Semitism that you can incorporate. Learning for Justice, previously known as Teaching Tolerance, they have a lot of tools there. You can integrate them into history class, but also into SEL lessons. StoryCorps is huge for oral history. You can have your kids listen to other people's stories and they can build their own on there as well, and it's free. And then Incitement is just filled with all kinds of lessons on the humanities. And the last one, right? Be inclusive of Indigenous educators as well as children. Be mindful of what you're doing and who you're teaching. You can go ahead and go next. So in the spirit of Enseñamos, I am working on building some lesson plans to share with teachers to kind of help them out, right? Because sometimes teachers don't know where to start. So look out for some of those lessons that will be coming out in the future. And that's it. There's a little quote and I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you, folks. We're going to make sure that we have everybody here on the screen. For all you watching, can you just give me a quick yes to confirm that all our panelists are now on your screen? Yes. All right. Thank you, everyone. All right. So I'm actually going, yeah, let's just leave it, Marisa. Let's because it was a little bit closer. Oh. Yeah. The way that we had it was actually really good. All right. So folks, if we can use the Q&A box or even the chat. So everyone's now on chat. Let's just throw some questions out here for dialogue to save some room so that, we can just, this is a plática. Let's just open conversation. Again, if you can drop it in the chat or in the Q&A. I see all the shout outs. Thank you for all the kind comments coming through. Yeah. Well, let's open to the panelists. Anything that kind of resonated, just in terms, I think each of you just brought some pretty powerful contributions here.
I mean, I was looking at Matt's slides, and when you talk about, what was going on that led to the Mexican independence, and in my 10th grade modern world history class, we're talking about the Enlightenment philosophers and the French Revolution and the American. So I'm like, there's such a correlation to what he was talking about today into my 10th grade class, but then it also lends itself to the ethnic studies class. So, it's cool to see that, these big ideas of this resistance are just things that you can just take, all weaves into each other,
I know I'm thinking about some that book for sure. Such an opportunity to talk about resistance like these type of people, so for sure I gotta add that in. Yeah, I just like the class is developing in my head a little bit. So thank you, all three of you, for your guys' presentation for sure.
Thanks. I'll say something about what Marisa said. It really stuck with me about how some of these topics, they're so deep, right? You have to make sure you're prepared to hold that space for the kids, because it is SEL work, right? And it's hard. So you have to be sure that you're ready to help these guys process. So have you healed, right? Have you processed that? Because you got to hold space for all these little ones, right? And even if they're in high school, they're little ones, right? So I think that really stuck with me. That really resonated with me.
You ready for them to push you too?
Mhm.
Yeah, because sometimes we're talking about this identity stuff. I'm like, oh man, I'm hecka calm now. And they make me realize it all the time. All the time. So even if you've done the work, sometimes it's still like your little blind spots, but they'll expose you.
Yeah.
It's resonating for you, Matt, teaching at your level and going back and thinking about some of the stuff that Carla said and just why is it, right? And, that young people are very capable, and whether we want to consider these things, right? Because they're grappling with it, they're, engaging in it. And oftentimes we discipline them based on, how they're expressing it. Oh.
Yeah, it's where's my mic here, I guess.
We gotta share mine with you.
Oh, okay,
We got
okay.
three mics.
Yeah, I think it's for me just fascinating to think about all these working with young people and talking about these things before getting to the space I'm in, because I've only been teaching at a college level, I guess it's almost 15 years now, but in that time I've seen more students come through who've had a class, who've had a race and social justice, and I mean, when I started, and again, my own experience was that I didn't really have that experience in the K-12. And so we can do so much more once we get to an intro or an intro level Mexican American history class. If some of this stuff that Carla was talking about, if some of this stuff has been explored already and these foundations have been laid, and so that's the big thing, I guess, that's standing out to me, and thinking about the ideas that I've been really inspired, I think, just as part of these conversations, thinking about how we can collaborate on workshops for teachers who are K-6 teachers who want more lessons on this stuff, or who want good examples to use, and so it's inspiring to me in that way. Just again, especially the idea of the conversations across, right? I mean, across institutions and types of places we teach, because at the end we're trying to do the same work, and so how we can support each other becomes clearer as we have these conversations, I think, right? And so that's a really cool part of it.
Yeah, to kind of just continue with that, one of the educators in Fresno Unified that's been a part of the Coalition for Ethnic Studies, Amy Sepulveda, she's kind of one of the ones that's trying to craft the curriculum at the middle school level, so that we're not double dipping into like the topics, like set the kids up for success, grounding them in these terms and these themes, so that when they get to the high school level, we're actually taking it to the next level, and hopefully get to the point. What I want to see is like the second semester of the high school level courses really becomes a civic engagement type of curriculum. It's not so much doing the learning and the researching, but what are you going to do in the community now? I think that's that transformative resistance that if we empower from the even fourth, fifth, sixth, middle school, now high school, now what are you gonna do for your community to elevate everything that you've just learned? Or help those that don't get access to this knowledge and empowerment.
That question of who are you in the world, right? And who will you be in the world? Yeah. We had someone drop in the chat, a teacher maybe outside of Fresno Unified, how would you suggest going about having these conversations and bringing these topics or classes up in our schools and districts? So, yeah.
I mean, you're the one.
Yeah, take it.
This guy right here.
Maybe I-
Yeah.
No, just kidding. You know, for us, like the way it kind of developed here, like I think we saw a need for it as you know, 4 teachers. We saw a need for it. We were already about to teach the class. There wasn't actually any structural support, and but we knew that once people knew what it was, that they would want it, you know. And so for us, a big part was a campaign. How do we get the word out exactly about what this is, what its impact is, and just the fact that you can't do it. You know, a lot of people didn't even realize, like, oh man, like this is actually an option at the high school level. Like, yeah, if you make it, you know. And so I would say the way it started for me, very simple. I just asked my principal, you know, if we could start a class. So this was it 5 years ago? And, you know, that was Chicano studies and African American studies. And then once we were looking at, you know, district wide, then you got to apply a little bit of pressure in a different way. I think for us, like I said, we went to the community. We had community feedback. We had a petition that we presented to the school district. And, you know, the numbers got kind of significant, 3,000, 4,000 signatures. And then once it's at that point, you know, the school districts work for the people, right? They work for you. And just a reminder that this is going to be something that's going to be put in place for the 29th, 30th. So it would benefit the school districts to get on top of it, get ahead of the game right now, you know? And so those are all talking points that could be, you know, in any community. And but for real though, I joke, but for real, let me know. And you know, we'll dump our resources on it, and we'll let you know exactly what steps we take, etc. Because you know, it's beneficial for our students, it's beneficial for the communities, and it can be done. And the school districts have money, especially now with the the new funding formula that they have. They're getting tons of money, and part of it is for this stuff, right? So you could, that's a very easy entryway into pushing your school district to adopt some of these courses. And the curriculum's out there too. At the state level, you're welcome to look at some of that stuff that's already published. So there's movement, man. There's movement. It's just, you got to shake some stuff up a little bit, and I think it's very doable. Send me a message, bros.
And to add on to that too, they did it. Got it. Fresno Unified has it, and it never goes to show you what can happen when new board members come into the space. So it just goes to show you that when you're looking at school board members, make sure that there are people that are really going to fight for all the stakeholders, the families, the parents, the teachers, because you can see, I'm not going to name names, but there's one board member on Fresno Unified board that, you know, he talks smack about this class. He would like to see this class be terminated. So we need to protect that. I mean, he's only one person. So it's good that there are other board members that champion this work, but the work is never done. And like, you know, I showed my students the article from Vicente Unified where there was a board member that was trying to ban the book that Fresno Unified just bought for our students. And it's just like mind blowing. Like my sophomores are like, so you're telling me the sophomores in Vicente Unified almost can't have this book right that you just got us right now? I'm like, yes. And so we're like, and then that led us into a discussion. These kids were like, well, who gets to be a school board member? Like, how does that even happen? I'm like, right, because they work for you. So this is, the work is never done, you know?
Yeah, connected back to that action piece, because they have voice too.
Exactly.
Students have voice too. Absolutely. What do you think, Adla?
Yeah, I think saying the students have voice, that's a big thing. Like students want classes like that.
Yes.
So getting the students involved in that movement, it's for them too, you know? So getting them involved, I think is a big deal, because like last year, I had some really big conversations with some of my students once they started coming back into hybrid, into in-person learning. And we started talking about ethnic studies courses because we don't have any at my middle school. So we're trying, I'm trying to get one going for next year. But yeah, it's going to be an elective too, right? So starting as an elective. But the kids want it. The kids are interested. They want to learn about themselves. They want to learn about each other. They want to explore these big themes, these big topics. They can handle it, they can handle it. So I think pulling the kids in too, to advocate for themselves, because it's their future, it's their knowledge, it's what they're bringing, with them as they get older and as they go into these higher ed spaces.
They're doing ethnic studies as they're asking for ethnic studies.
There you go.
That's it. That's where it's at.
So we got another question. What do your students teach you? So the opportunity for students to share their knowledge and recognize themselves as experts in their own histories can be powerful. So I know, Marisa, you brought some artifacts. What do your students teach you? So much.
All the TikTok trends.
Yeah.
No, just kidding. I think for me, I could maybe answer that a little bit, like to be curious and to keep asking questions, especially when it comes to the identity work. Like, so what does this mean? Like, what are, like, they don't use this language, but like, what are the implications of that? Like, why are we talking about this? Why does this matter? Always that question, what does this mean? Always a question, why does this matter? So I think they keep me asking those questions too, like, why?
I'll give an example with one of my students. They get me to look at the everyday logistics of schools that I don't really realize are biased towards them. So like, for example, one of my students, like Ms. Rodriguez, these desks are biased towards me and my body size. And I'm like, please speak more. Speak more. And it's just like, she's taking these ideas of institution, and one size fits all. And I'm like, that's what you need to write that out. We'll take you to the board meeting and we can talk about that. So they're teaching me to look at like the day-to-day logistics of schools and what are we doing to empower our stakeholders to speak on what they think needs to be changed. What would help them learn?
Yeah, absolutely.
I know for me, like just the importance of critical hope, I feel like. There's pieces when you talk about history, they get so negative, and I know we've been talking about like coupling that with resistance, right? But in the middle of like some of this negative stuff, these kids will be, talking about resistance, but it's coming from hope, right? That, all this stuff can be fixed, right? So that's one thing that they always ground me, and it's like, just the way stuff is isn't just the way stuff is, right? That they were active participants that can't be, that can do something, and so, like when the ethnic studies happened, I was thinking about my students, right? Like they were the ones that were saying like, why don't we have this? And I'm like, well, why don't we have it? And so it's that hope, that critical hope, and they always seem to fill my cup up, so.
Or why do you only get one section and then everyone has to just like cram into one room, right?
There's a lot of them,
to take that one section of that class?
They've asked me that question, man.
Yeah.
That's that question. We have two sections, I think, both at 36 students.
Wow.
35 students, yeah.
Okay, demand is there, right? The demand is there.
Oh, yeah.
Well, in
yeah, there's a lot of
theory-
kids that get turned away, yeah.
Yeah, because if we had a bunch of kids who were ready and jumping to take AP science, I doubt that they would not open up more sections
Yeah.
of AP science, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, there's a comment here in the chat. Love this. I wasn't taught about my culture at home and even much less in school. So to see teachers bringing this into the classroom is beautiful. To feel represented and learn about where you come from and not in an Anglo form is awesome. Yeah. And sometimes you don't even realize the depth of the pain and trauma that has caused you, right? So I think that feeling of hope, that feeling of undoing, right? Just that spiritual cleansing that comes with this is just happening right there in front of you. I want to speak on that point because I know as a collective, you know, one of the things that this series is really invested in is to continue to bring educators like this together. And we know that our audience, it gets the most out of actually seeing how K-12 educators are doing this. Like the things that Marisa brought, the visuals, the photos, like these are so impactful for future teachers to actually see it. And so I want to acknowledge some of our librarians here at Fresno State and the journey that we're on to actually develop some of these lesson plans and to do that collectively so that educators, folks like you all who are making these comments, how do I start? What do I do? Like that you can be met with a starting point, right? Starting points are so important. And it resonates, God love the comments you're making about teacher education, right? As somebody who, you know, is somebody of a, you know, Chicanx, Latino studies background in teacher education. This is very important, right? How we prepare educators is important, and then how we sustain them to do the things that you all do is important. And so I want to bring that into the conversation because this isn't just a plática, so let's talk, let's share some cool stuff, and then everyone goes home, right? I think Matt alluded to this earlier, that this is a journey, and I think that we have more and more educators who are just really wanting to be in community, right? The same way everyone wants to do these things for their students. And so I want to put it out to those listening and those who will be watching this recording, that that's a big undertaking that we want to also explore, because especially locally, right, we have a lot of just a lot of knowledge and histories that I think we can really, that you all are uplifting in the classroom, but I think collectively to be doing that. Because you go and you see the books or you see the examples, Fernando, you alluded to, like the statewide, and so many of those examples are anchored in experiences outside of the Central Valley, right? And they're great. They're really informative. There's things that you can that you can learn from it, but communities here have a lot to give and have been giving a lot. So I feel like in a way, this is also a way of bringing the Central Valley, like bringing our communities out from the margin, right? Statewide, this community, this area has been very marginalized. I know, Matt, we had a conversation a while back about like going back to the history of the building of the 99, right? Tell that story, right? Like the structural.
I think, well, I know we've had conversations about the 99 before because of like kind of it's in Fresno history, it's kind of like the dividing line between communities of color on the west side and what were historically the, you know, Mexicano and African-American community of the west side. I think there was also, though, I'm not sure if it's the same one, but I think there was another conversation that I recalled about talking about the I-5 and how about the I-5, how my mom was talking about, my mom grew up in Mendota on the west side of Fresno County, and was talking just in a conversation one day talking about kind of growing up and that not being there until the 1970s or something, right? And so that when the 5 happened, it was in the 1970s. And that really kind of disconnected Fresno from the Bay in LA.
That's right.
And there was a way that, like literally prior to the 1970s, if you were in LA and were trying to get to the Bay Area, you kind of had to go through Fresno. And then the 5 changed that in the 70s. And what we were talking about was actually about like a lot of the lessons I'd learned from my elders, from people like Ricardo Duran, who taught here in the earliest version of La Raza Studies, and talked about all the collaboration that used to happen across, like from LA through the valley to the Bay. And it's not just that freeway messed it all up and changed, but it was a kind of conversation about that, though, that we were getting into, talking about space and talking about those collaborations of the past. And anyway, just how the freeways can change things.
The structural bypass, right? That you literally can now go from these 2 major epicenters, right, in the state, and you never have to engage or drive down. the
So, like,
99,
connect with that.
right? And so,
Yeah.
yeah, it was that piece right there. And that's important for us to know and recognize, right? That there was a time where you couldn't go up and down the state of California without engaging and smelling the love of the Central Valley, you know, in all of its great, like everything that you get to engage. And it's things like that, right? That is these stories and these experiences and articulating these structural and institutional factor, like that's at the core of what we're doing here, right? And to Carla's earlier point, when you're having to read passages or having to read about something in ELA, or you're having to engage in something like in your civics class, like these things could very well, like, you know, from history to contemporary things could certainly make its way in. Yeah, I always remember that deep conversation that we had about just, yeah, the 99, but the building of the I-5. You can roll through the whole state and never experience us.
Okay.
And you can argue that it adds to our marginality, right? So I don't see any more questions popping up. Maybe we do a few last words, and then I'm going to pop up a few events that we have coming up. Do you want to do a quick round and just some final thoughts?
You know, I think I want to just pick up with something Carla had mentioned about, like, the students keep asking, so why does this matter? Why are we talking about this? Right. And so thinking about, I think I'm going back to one of your questions that I didn't really answer, but what do students teach us? Right. And so that continual question over the years, and why does this matter? What has changed dramatically what I teach. And I mean, what I teach about Mexican independence, but what I teach about any given subject that I, you know, started off teaching what I learned about it. And then I started thinking, well, I'm not sure. Why does that matter? I don't know. Maybe we don't need to talk about it. Maybe we need to talk more about these things that matter to you, and that matter to the students in my classroom, and that connect to you, rather than this is what I've got, and you have to know Hidalgo did this, and he did it in this year. And so for me anyway, I just wanted to pick up with that, but that question of why does it matter, and the fact that in particular, I think coming from the disciplines of ethnic studies, Chicano studies, the idea is like this discipline is created by student demands to be relevant to students, right? And again, it's easy to lose track of that, and it becomes just another discipline at an institution of higher learning, right? Which it also is. It's also a general ed requirement. It's also these other things. But so it's, you know, keeping that in perspective. So yeah.
Thank you, man.
I will speak to the fact that there is a lot of negativity around the teaching profession right now, and there is a teacher shortage. And so if you're on this call and you're an educator, thank you. And if you're trying to be an educator, please do so, because our students in the Valley want to see teachers that look like them. They need teachers that they can relate to. And this is a beautiful profession. And there's some room and leeway here to start incorporating these lessons. And so I implore you to teach your passion. You know, it becomes infectious. The students will love you for it, and they need it. And we need more teachers. That's that.
Just what I was thinking about right now. I know we talked about it like a couple, like very, very, very quickly about the necessity to kind of build up ethnic studies here in the county, in the Central Valley, and just, man, I'm thinking we need that little institute, man, not a little institute, but an institute to invite, you know, I know some of you guys are asking questions for us to like build some stuff together, you know.
That's so awesome, yeah.
And you're about to be like we all have to support each other, you know. And so in the works. In the works.
There you go.
Enseñamos. In the works.
That's right.
No, just not to put you all on the
We got
spot.
We're here for you.
Yeah, we need it, man. We need it. And
Sure.
you know, as long as there's people out here that want to do the work, then let's support each other. And let's
Yeah.
I'll kind of just combine kind of what both, like everybody said, right? First of all, you know, that you're not alone, build community, make connections, not just in your PLC, right? your PLCs, your professional learning community. That doesn't mean your grade level team. It means the professionals you learn with, your community with all these educators, right? So everyone, not just who teaches the same grade level as you at your school. So build community, learn from people. Maybe we can get something going with that. That would be really awesome. I know a lot of educators would be interested in that. And then in addition, besides that, and continuing to educate yourself, always remember and acknowledging, because I was looking through this, fourth grade social science book. So if you teach elementary school and you're talking about Native Americans, Indigenous people, don't talk about them in past tense, right? All of this, past tense. They're still here, okay? They're still here, they're everywhere. So keep that in mind. Just keep that in mind.
Thank you for that, Carla. All right, so we're gonna close out here. I do want to share a few. This is again, first part of a multi-series endeavor. We will have our next event will be the end of the month, and we'll be focusing on ancestral approaches to healing. I want to lift up and acknowledge here at Fresno State, the Cross-Cultural and Gender Center, our colleagues, Dianita Del Toro and Esteban Para, who have been really instrumental in also bringing students into these conversations as well. So we will be collaborating with them on that, and then a few others as well. So definitely you can put your phone up to that QR code down on the bottom. I'm gonna also put this info in the chat, do some multitasking over here. Oh, thank you for that, Maribel. The next one is for all you educators out there, we're kicking off an art contest. And so, and it's really not a contest because everyone's a winner. So this is where we want to develop a colección de arte, where we're asking educators, right, to work with young people and to ask them, right, what does it mean to teach in the Central Valley, right? So this is an event that it's a multi-piece event, collaborating with Arte America. And the idea is that we will have encouraging teachers to use art as a form of expression. We do a lot of essay writing and things like that, which are great. But for this, we want young people to use art, just like you see up behind us, what the examples that Marisa showed and others, to really articulate what it means to teach in the Central Valley, and to the sentiment that Matt expressed, right? Like, what does this mean to you right here, right now? And so we will be curating and bringing all of those pieces together. We will be exhibiting them. Hopefully, if things go well and the Gala does happen at Arte America, we will be showcasing them there and many other places. And so please, again, the link is in the chat. I encourage you, teachers, work with your students, use art, bring art into the classroom, and artistic expression. The last thing is, we love your feedback. So if you can, give us your feedback on how things work, this conversation was today, how we could, make things better. Do you want more of these conversations? Please give us your feedback. It really does mean a lot to us, and we listen. In fact, this whole series that will fundamentally focus on topics and overwhelmingly with teachers, that is something that we got out of the last series that we did. So we are paying attention. And so finally, stay in touch. Fernando and the others, we will continue to be building together, growing the collective. If you're an educator and you just want to be part of these conversations, you want to perhaps be part of a Plática, things like that, just reach out, stay in touch. We are recording this, so this will be also posted. It'll be sent out to your email once the link is up, and then it will be archived here in our social media and our website. So with that, I thank you. Have a good evening, and yeah, stay in touch. Thank you. Bye. Okay, push it down. How do you feel?
Good. Good vibes on the.
Yeah.